From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Voters in Massachusetts have weighed in, and they want to see the legislature legalize the recreational use of marijuana. But will lawmakers drag their feet? Legal pot's impact on the Commonwealth and Rhode Island. Plus, dissecting the bruising campaign 2016 season and what it all means for Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker. This week on Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Attorney Preston Halperin will be joining us on the second half to talk about the legalization of marijuana in Massachusetts. But first, Massachusetts politics, and our guests are Stonehill College professor Peter Ubertaccio, and we welcome back Lauren Dezenski from Politico, Massachusetts, and of course WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Good morning, everybody. Are you feeling better after the elections? We've all calmed down now? You feeling relaxed?
It's time to sleep it off.
Okay, yeah, sleep is the most important part.
Before we get into national elections, though, I do want to talk about the legalization of marijuana in Massachusetts. Won by a good margin, 54 to 46. But there seems to be a pushback, if I'm reading the newspapers out of Mass correctly, from the legislature there. Are lawmakers, do you think, looking to push the brakes, Lauren?
The difficult thing is that no matter what, there is a mandate here with the ballot question. But lawmakers all along, basically except Senate President Stan Rosenberg, said that they had specific concerns with the way that the law is written. And so now we're seeing kind of the tweaking and fiddling with the forthcoming law's language. And there was so much kind of left up in the air with the phrasing of the ballot question, specifically with creating the Cannabis Control Commission, which basically will look at how the law is being rolled out. But
is that going to be like the Casino Commission? Are we going to?
It's complicated, and we don't really know what it's going to look like. But it would be something similar. I think most would say that at least the Gaming Commission has been successful in creating guidelines and being transparent about unfurling that law. And I think that is an effective blueprint. And I think most lawmakers would look to replicate that. But at the end of the day, December 15th, marijuana is going to be legal in Massachusetts.
Yeah, that's true. No matter what, that's because that was in the law they passed. It's definitely going to happen December 15th. There's no ifs, ands, or buts there.
I'm right. I think so.
You can't. The shops don't open until 2018, right?
Right. And a lot of that also depends on how the process works. And there's a way that can shorten or that can lengthen the shop opening process, but I'm pretty sure that to have recreational marijuana on December 15th will be legal. It's just the process of attaining it and purchasing it. That's kind of the next step.
Professor,
it will be legal under state law and illegal under federal law. Okay. So there's still this issue that needs to be resolved. The regulatory apparatus doesn't yet exist, and it's in the hands of lawmakers who are almost uniformly, as Lauren pointed out, opposed to this initiative. We've also seen the legislature push back against other initiatives, like clean elections was the law of the state until the legislature decided that it didn't want to move on clean elections, and it is now no longer the law of the state. So I suspect that Lauren is exactly right, that the mandate is real, that we're going to move in the direction of legalization for recreational marijuana. I still think there are some kinks in the system that will give the legislature and other lawmakers the opportunity to apply some things.
Not just lawmakers either, though. Doesn't the law allow pushback from local cities and towns, for instance, specifically with shops? Could there be some NIMBYism here, not in my backyard, and have a referendum on shops moving into a city or a town?
Sure. I mean, cities and towns have to be proactive if they don't want to have recreational cannabis shops in their geographic area. So they're going. I suspect you're going to see quite a few who are going to take up the mantle and be I don't know what we call it, a dry town or smoke-free town in this sense, but I suspect there will be quite a few that will do that.
I remember when I was a reporter in Massachusetts, there was always the controversy over the income tax reduction that had been passed, and then the lawmakers kind of halted it at a certain percentage before it got all the way down. Is there concern, Lauren, among lawmakers and the state officials who oppose this, that if they monkey with it too much, they are going against, as Tim said, a pretty clear vote by the voters? It wasn't particularly close in the end on marijuana.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, lawmakers, again, they can't really go against the voters here, and they have to basically address their own concerns until they do. but there are questions in terms of the tax that would be levied as the result of the law, and whether or not that tax is sufficient to cover the social programs that are needed as a result of that. And there's going to be a lot of jockeying and moving around and moving parts with this question. And I think voters who went to the polling booths in November and cast their ballot for this, I have to wonder if they really understood what exactly they were voting for. Legalizing marijuana is so much more complicated than just saying yes. And whether it's local zoning with, putting dispensaries into different communities, whether it's restrictions with, flipping current medical marijuana facilities to recreational marijuana facilities. These are such important and complicated questions that even though voters are in support of it, we have legislators who were against it, but it's going to be such a process going forward.
If shops don't open until 18, but you can smoke it in December, how do you get it? I'm sorry, I just don't understand.
Okay, Tim.
No, but can you not legally buy it in Massachusetts unless you're a medical marijuana card holder?
So one of the ways to kind of get around that is by growing marijuana.
Okay,
so if you are able to have marijuana that you potentially grow in your own home, so then comes the question of how do you get the seeds to grow it? Again, this is a very complicated, thorny process, and again, like the feds.
Do you think it'll be pushed even further? I think I read that Treasurer Goldberg is asking lawmakers so she can get her regulatory apples, in a row,
right.
Ducks in a row. Do you think do you see a delay on the horizon?
I do see a delay given the tendency of the legislature and other policymakers. I think that there will also be a question of also enforcement. That what we may see is the decline. It's not that grave or great to begin with, but it does exist in some communities where local law enforcement stop enforcing it, and if people are caught with it, they may not be arrested. So that's one direct implication from the initiative. But I do think in other ways, certainly the legislature and the treasurer and others can push this back. And to Lauren's point, when we say they can't go against the will of the voters, from a democratic perspective, small d, we understand that. The reality is they can, because so very few of them are actually ever challenged for re-election. And this isn't the only issue that voters cast a ballot on. So in a town like Plymouth, very big town, their state senator, very popular, opposed to the initiative, Plymouth passed it. So if that legislator decides that he wants to delay and push back, what are the real political implications for him? I'm guessing none.
Well, it depends who runs against him, right?
We don't, in Massachusetts, we don't actually see a lot of our legislators challenged for re-election, and most that are safely re-elected.
Professor, I'll stick with you on this. So we watch down here around in awe at Charlie Baker's approval ratings, which are always seem to be sky high. Governor Raimondo, perhaps some jealousy there. But we've seen before you can start very popular and get whittled away as he looks toward 2018. When you look at his political position right now and look at what he needs to do to get reelected in 2 years, do you think he can maintain this? Do you think what could go wrong for Charlie Baker?
Well, in some ways, the Trump election creates this unusual situation where there is a Republican in the White House who is at odds with the Republican governor. How long that lasts remains to be seen. Trump is not your normal Republican. He's not your normal president. And so I think that it's unclear how this impacts a state race in Massachusetts. It could benefit an already popular governor. I mean, it's like clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right, where he's the only one who seems reasonable, right? And he's very much a nuts and bolts kind of, I can fix it person. And so I think that the goodwill that the governor has going into 2018 is pretty strong. And sure, lots of things could go wrong. The T, for example, the MBTA, which continues to be a nightmare, a transportation nightmare of epic proportions.
Very real side.
that could come back and harm him. I think being at odds with the White House and some folks in his own party who are very much in favor of Donald Trump could harm him, but I think it's going to take a lot more than that to defeat him. Massachusetts has not defeated a governor running for re-election in a general election since 1974.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay,
so other governors have lost in primaries, but a governor hasn't lost in a primary since 1982. So we don't have a history here of defeating governors when they're running for re-election.
Lauren, you had a scoop this week that Newton Mayor Seti Warren, a Democrat who's been buzzed about for a lot of years up there in Massachusetts, has hired John Walsh, who was close to Deval Patrick, to run his campaign. Is that makes Seti Warren kind of the front runner for the Democratic nomination? Who else, if anybody, seems like they're going to be in the mix?
Absolutely. So Seti Warren's name has been in the mix, been a part of the conversation for so long. Former State Senator Dan Wolf is a name that's thrown around. We have members of the congressional delegation, including Seth Moulton, Joe Kennedy, potentially Catherine Clark. There's also mayors like Kim Driscoll of Salem, as well as Somerville Mayor Joe Curtitown.
Are you rattling all Democrats here, by the way?
Yeah, these are all Democrats.
Okay, all right.
And one of the things that I'm kind of fascinated by is Charlie Baker going to get primaried? You know, Mark Fisher, who ran against him in 2014 and actually kind of gave him a little bit of a run for his money, at least in the Republican primary. What's he doing? We don't know yet. Obviously, it's still very early, but I think for a lot of, especially these Democratic players, what just happened last week with the election changes the calculus. For those interested in staying in Washington, seeing a path forward in a Clinton administration, that doesn't exist, obviously, in a Trump Washington, D.C., where basically all three branches are deeply red. So an inclination to kind of stay down in Washington doesn't necessarily exist anymore. And one thing that I will say, previously to Charlie Baker and kind of things that could affect him, he is now in a difficult position where he has to work with Donald Trump in a way that his Democratic colleagues, and specifically the DC delegation, doesn't have to. They get to have the role of being the thorn in Donald Trump's side because they're Democrats. Charlie Baker, not only is he a Republican governor, but he also kind of has to be the one to work with President-elect Trump in a way that the Democrats just simply don't need to. And to a certain extent, it puts...
Does he, though?
I mean, at the end of the day, all we've heard about...
He's the governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
But at the same time, we're also dealing with an administration, at least that we assume, that is led by someone who seeks revenge, who has retribution. And, if there's so many members of Massachusetts who are acting out against him and his administration, we need to preserve federal funding, or at least Charlie Baker
Well, maybe
would.
Massachusetts will secede. So I got to ask you guys this report. It came out this week, and I just want you to weigh in on it. Former Governor Mitt Romney, who absolutely blasted Donald Trump in March, called him, I think, a fraud and a phony, is reportedly meeting with Donald Trump this weekend. NBC, citing sources, mind you, said that Romney's on a short list to possibly be Secretary of State. Is that something the former governor could stomach, you think, or he would be willing to do, or do you think this is just a meeting between Donald Trump and Mitt Romney?
I have a hard time believing that Mitt Romney could stomach working for someone of Donald Trump's temperament. That's not the kind of person that Mitt Romney has surrounded himself before. Now he is the new president. I think reaching out to Romney, bringing him into Trump Tower is very smart politics on behalf of the president-elect. But to be a cabinet secretary to someone like Trump, it is such a wild card. I'm guessing that these folks will have absolutely no independence or independent authority to do much of anything, and I don't know if Mitt Romney would be inclined to pursue a portfolio where he had to check in with Donald Trump's White House before he could do anything.
We have to go to a break, but briefly, and this is a big question, I'm going to ask you to do it within a minute. Polling has come under the microscope after this election. Do you think national polling is in trouble?
I think there are far too many national polls. I think they have a lot to answer for. I think that we all have a lot to answer for. I think that we were so convinced that a man of his temperament couldn't win that we stopped listening to the people who were saying they were going to vote for him. And if those aren't part of your inputs in any good poll, then the output, the data, or the results is not going to be very good.
And I have one last question for Lauren. A lot of interest in Rhode Island in Kurt Schilling's flirtation with a 2018 U.S. Senate race. You actually got a little intel this week, I believe, about that and how likely it is or what's going on right now. Is it real?
We still don't know. Kurt Schilling's wife hasn't weighed in yet. Mass GOP Chair Kirsten Hughes told me the other day that Kurt Schilling has not reached out to the party. He's actually made no moves. It seems like he's just interested in drumming up a little bit of attention. And whether or not he actually runs, I mean, it will be interesting. Competitive races are somewhat rare in Massachusetts, and it would be good for the electorate to, kind of have that. And one thing just on the polling really quickly, all polls are not made the same. We saw more of a breakdown in the state-based polling and in the Midwest. We didn't know what was going on there. For the most part, national polling and regional New England polling was, for the most part, on track.
The Massachusetts polls were pretty good.
Exactly, as well as New Hampshire, and for the most part, national polling. But in those specific states where we didn't see, specifically the swing states, we didn't see that surge, and that's the problem.
Lauren Dezenski of Politico, Massachusetts, and Professor Peter Ubertaccio from Stonehill College. Thank you very much for joining us. When we come back, Preston Halperin, he's an attorney. We're going to talk about what legalization of marijuana in Massachusetts means to Rhode Island. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. And our guest on the second half is Preston Halperin. He's a managing partner at law firm Sheckman, Halperin and Savage. Preston, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
So first, just briefly, we want to set the stage so people understand why you're here. As a lawyer, part of your practice is representing some medical marijuana growers and in other areas of legalization of marijuana, right?
That's true. And I have a little bit of a unique perspective in that I practiced in Massachusetts for the first 15 years of my career and 18 years here in Rhode Island. So I've been called into situations in Massachusetts as well as Rhode Island. And from the legal side, we're seeing it come from a lot of different directions. We're seeing it come from people who are seeking licenses, the new licenses in particular here in Rhode Island for cultivators. We're seeing it from the perspective of people who are trying to find locations in communities in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island where they're running into zoning issues and local issues. We're seeing it from the perspective of investors who are either in the state or coming into the state who are looking for help in investing money with people who might have the knowledge in the area of growing but not necessarily the money or the wisdom to run a business.
So navigating the bureaucracy of all of this.
That's certainly a big part of it.
Okay.
Big part of it.
I want to play a little bit of sound for you and get your reaction to it. We met up with Governor Gina Raimondo earlier this week. Actually, I think, Ted, it was you. And it's clear she is in no rush to legalize marijuana here in Rhode Island, sort of a pump the brakes attitude. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
On this one, I'd rather get it right than go fast. So I'm open to legalizing. Certainly we have to look at it more urgently now that our neighbor has gone for it. But a lot of people are getting hurt, particularly children and young people who are getting their hands on edible forms of marijuana. So I will say we're going to look at it. I expect we'll take it up with the legislature, but better safe than sorry. So let's take our time on this one and get it right to keep people safe.
All right, well, there she is, Governor Gina Raimondo. Let's take our time on this one. Better safe than sorry. What do you say to that?
I don't think anyone could argue that with such a significant change in our law and bringing in such a new industry of such magnitude that it needs to be done thoughtfully and carefully. And knowing the governor, it doesn't surprise me at all that she's going to make sure that it gets done with the right level of thought. And she's put the right people in place to do that. And you can see it happening already. They've issued some new regulations that are going to go into effect that are really much more far-reaching than we've had in the past to deal with this new cultivation process, where they're going to be setting up a variety of new locations throughout the state to allow growing to take place and sales to the compassion centers. And you can see from the thought that's going to that regulation exactly how this will roll out. And it's an excellent step in the direction of what may become recreational legalization down the road.
You know, the Journal had that terrific series they did recently on the growth of medical marijuana in Rhode Island. And one takeaway I had is it seemed like, you can tell me if I was misreading this there, this could, the way they're putting the regs in place for medical marijuana could be, you could maybe not flip a switch, but relatively easy start to convert those into legal recreational marijuana regulations. Is that fair to say? We're putting that apparatus in place already?
No question, we're building the foundation. You still have to build it out in a lot of new directions when you start talking about retail sales and inventory control at that level, and excise tax and sales tax, and how we're going to drive the revenue. It's much easier, obviously, when you're dealing with, at the moment, 3 compassion centers and some number of cultivation centers. But it's really about safety and health first. So they're going to have to bring out new regulations on laboratory testing, for example, which already exists in most states, and that's probably going to be coming down the pike very soon. So we need that for the medical marijuana side, never mind the recreational side. So we've got a ways to go, but as I say, I believe the governor is going to do it the right way.
You hear this push from the pro-pot people that say, look, Massachusetts, they just passed it, but the shops don't open until 2018. And you heard from the first half of the program, there might be some hesitance from the legislature up in Mass, and that deadline could even get pushed back. So the folks on the pro-legalization side are like, Rhode Island should jump and do it now and get ahead of Massachusetts. Is that the right move?
Well, you know, there is a difference between Mass and Rhode Island in the sense that Rhode Island really does need something to help jumpstart the economy. We're not competing particularly well with what's going on up north in Massachusetts. And this is an enormous opportunity. Putting aside the personal views on is marijuana good or bad, from a business standpoint, we're looking at an opportunity not unlike the one that evolved when we started getting into computers. I mean, this is enormous. We're talking about an industry that might get up to $20 billion over the next 8 to 10 years. And from the standpoint of the state, it's not just about whether people are going to be smoking dope or not. It's about, are we going to be having people growing it, manufacturing food production? Are we going to be having people taking up real estate? The opportunities for research and innovation are there, and we've got these great universities. If we can just get all this going, there's a great business here, and we need new innovative business.
The governor raised a concern, though, on the money side of things related to this. Later on in that conversation, we saw the clip from, which is, she said to us, the revenue, she said, from talking to Colorado's governor, the revenue isn't as great as people think because the regulations and enforcement is very expensive. And there has been a lot of talk around kind of like this will be just, showering money on Smith Hill the second we legalize it. I mean, what's your view on that? How much is the upside being overstated because it'll be expensive to regulate this?
Well, people predict and project, and proponents have different numbers. I looked at the numbers, and you see numbers that, well, the industry is going to be a $20 billion industry. I saw a number, it's going to be a $40 billion industry. I see that Rhode Island is going to make $29 million a year in revenue, or they're going to make $40 million a year in revenue. Nobody knows. Until this really unfolds and really takes root, we're really not going to know, but we do know what's happening in the other states. There's your baseline. So you hear numbers like, Washington State brought in $140 million worth of tax revenue. Certainly there are going to be costs associated with setting up an infrastructure and a policing mechanism. But I would hope that some of that must already exist. We do have an alcohol beverage control. We have to deal with that. There have to be mechanisms that once they get this thing running, it will get more streamlined. And it's hard for me to imagine that an industry of this magnitude isn't going to be very profitable for the state.
Tapping into your legal knowledge here, there's a very real disconnect between federal law and, say, the state law in Massachusetts and what potentially could be in Rhode Island. And we've talked to law enforcement, and they say there are issues in Colorado where banks just won't hold money from these businesses because the feds, they still consider it an illegal substance. Certainly there's been a little more tolerance under the current administration. Who knows what the next administration will bring. How do you square those two laws, and will businesses in Rhode Island, if it's legalized, be able to put their money in banks around here?
It's a mixed bag, the federal issue, in this regard. It presents a problem in terms of can't cross state lines. It presents a banking problem, and on that issue, in talking to people over the last year and a half, I've heard a number of things. I've heard of a bank in Massachusetts that's accepting cash and using it to fill their ATM machines. I'm not sure how that fits with the law, but that's what they're doing. I heard of another bank, and more than one, that is accepting deposits, a local bank, and they're charging the depositor $4,000 to $5,000 a month for the privilege of accepting their deposits. But it is a problem. It's a problem not just from the point of view of where do you put the money, but there's no financing available to get these businesses off the ground. So it's an issue. But here's the other side of it that I find interesting. If this were now legal across the country, would the opportunity exist to establish all these local businesses in Rhode Island? Or would the large companies be setting up some enormous grow facilities somewhere in the Midwest and we would simply be purchasing product? The business opportunity in Rhode Island might exist because of the federal law that forces it to happen within our boundaries. So that's why I think the state and every state really has to look at whether or not, if this is an emerging industry, a wave that's coming to our shores, whether we like it or not, do we want to get a foothold in this so that we can have the jobs, have all the advantages, since we may very well have whatever disadvantages there are anyway.
Tim mentioned on the first half, the potential for NIMBYism on marijuana. We've seen North Attleboro right now is having a fight over a medical marijuana situation there. How much with your clients have you seen pushback from cities and towns? Are there some that are welcoming and others very against it? We only have about 30, 40 seconds left.
There's no question about it. That happens in every area of businesses setting up, but certainly more so, I'm sure, with marijuana. So you have local zoning. That's one of the legal issues that we grapple with, because currently some cities and towns, and this is true in Massachusetts, will create a zone. It's usually in their industrial zone. And guess what happens? People run in there and grab the large buildings because that's the one place you can do it, and the price of that real estate just doubled. So you're having that type of problem where people are going to have trouble finding suitable locations.
Preston Halperin, attorney and managing partner at law firm Sheckman, Halperin and Savage. Thank you very much for joining us. I have a feeling this is going to be a big topic over the next year. We'll probably have you back if you'll be willing to do it. If you missed any of it, it's online, WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White, and we'll see you next week on Newsmakers.